Before we break down this performance by the Minnesota Vikings and Green Bay Packers, let's just let this sink in for a second. The Minnesota Vikings are a 14-2 football team and control their own destiny. They have a chance to beat the Detroit Lions next week on the road, and if they win that game, they are the number 1 seed in the NFC. These are all facts that we know. But let's just let this sink in for a second. Remember Sam Darnold? The guy that we signed last offseason to a 1-year, $10 million deal to be a bridge quarterback? Remember that? What was your reaction when the Vikings signed Sam Darnold to be that guy? Go back several months, almost a year, and think about, okay, we're bringing in Sam Darnold. He'll probably last 5 games. Then he'll bring in the rookie, and we'll set off into the sunset. 14-2. Darnold's completely changed his career trajectory, whether that's with the Vikings next season or some other football team. And they are competing for the number 1 seed in the NFC. All right. Enough of that wishy-washy talk. Let's break down the Vikings win. They win 27-25 in a game that was eerily similar to the game that they played earlier in the season against the Green Bay Packers. Same formula. Vikings early lead, offense is rolling, defense is shutting down Jordan Love. Up early, 13-3 at halftime. Up 27-10. Green Bay can't do anything offensively. Green Bay can't stop the Minnesota Vikings defensively. And then late in the game, the Green Bay Packers go on their late run and give themselves a legitimate chance to try to win this football game down to 3 timeouts and the 2-minute warning. And the Minnesota Vikings close out the Packers 27-25 in a game that ended up being way more thrilling than it should have been. But let's just talk about the game and what stood out. So, number 1, first takeaway is this. Sam Darnold, how can it not be? 33 for 43, 377 yards, 3 touchdowns, 1 pick, a QBR of 79.6, and a passer rating of 116.1. You know what's funny is that we are starting to see the temperature in the room change regarding Sam Darnold and his future with the Minnesota Vikings. You know, coming into this season, the plan the Minnesota Vikings had, and this is not guesswork, this is the plan. You sign Darnold to a 1-year deal, you draft a quarterback. You're going to put that quarterback in eventually, that's the plan. And the plan entering the season, Darnold was always going to be QB1, regardless of how McCarthy played in preseason game number 2 or preseason game number 3. And maybe midseason you make that switch, depending on how Darnold is playing. Well, Darnold has completely flipped the future plans within the Minnesota Vikings organization because of how he's played this season. Sam Darnold in this football game was tearing up the Green Bay Packers. They had no answer for him in the first half and in that third quarter. Second quarter, Vikings put up 13 points. Third quarter, Vikings put up 14 points. Darnold was hitting Naylor. He was hitting Jefferson, hitting Addison, hitting Hawkinson. And he is so good at moving around in the pocket. And, well, one, he's good at scrambling. But he's also so good at making a slight change in his footwork, a slight movement in the pocket, and finding a wide receiver for a touchdown. Case in point, the Jordan Addison touchdown. A guy got around Brian O'Neill. He steps up into the pocket, makes a quick jerk to the left and quick jerk to the right, buys himself a second more time. And that's just enough time to hit Addison in stride on the numbers for an easy touchdown throw and catch. It's those simple things that Sam Darnold is so good at that we are seeing for the first time in his career because he's got a good head coach, great organization, and guys that can throw him the football. Also, credit to the Minnesota Vikings offensive line for keeping Darnold upright almost the entire game. He took 1 sack in this game. So credit the Minnesota Vikings offensive line for protecting him and giving him a clean pocket and allowing him to make throws to the wide receivers and running backs. One thing that needs to be pointed out here is the brilliant scheme of Kevin O'Connell to utilize a legitimate threat in Jalen Nailor and Darnold for finding him. It was planned for Jalen Nailor to have a big first half against the Green Bay Packers. He used Jefferson and Addison to get what he wanted with Jalen Nailor. And I think Nailor gets forgotten because we got Addison and Jefferson and Hawkinson. But when Addison was injured the first few weeks of the season, it was actually Jalen Nailor that stepped up in his absence and scored touchdowns. This was actually Nailor's 6th touchdown catch of the season. So he is a talented wide receiver, probably the most talented wide receiver 3 in the NFL. And that's crazy because not only do the Vikings have a superior talented wide receiver 3, but they have the most talented wide receiver 2 in the NFL, Jordan Addison. He would be wide receiver 1 on a lot of football teams. And now that Darnold trusts Addison, it doesn't have tunnel vision towards Jefferson the entire game. We are seeing Addison flourish week after week after week. And that's why we're seeing the Minnesota Vikings offense reach new heights. So the fact that Darnold found Nailor multiple times in the first half, he had 5 catches, 81 yards, 1 touchdown for 31 yards. He had 5 targets. So Nailor was a premium part of the Minnesota Vikings offense in this game. And I know that because Nailor really hadn't been focused on much recently on the Vikings. Against the Seahawks, 1 catch. Against the Bears, 1 catch. Against Atlanta, no targets. Against Arizona, 2 targets. Against Chicago, 2 targets. Against Tennessee, 2 targets. This was Jalen Nailor's first 5-target game that he had since Sunday, October 20th against the Detroit Lions, in which he was targeted 5 times. But earlier on in the year, he had touchdowns in the first 3 football games of the year. Against the Giants, San Fran, and Houston, when Addison wasn't healthy, Jalen Nailor had a touchdown grab in each of those games. So he has talent. He has the ability to make plays. And with the Green Bay Packers playing so well defensively recently, and they showed the graphic on television, they were ranked as the best defense in the NFL the last 5 weeks of the season, or the last 5 weeks. Kevin O'Connell utilized a guy that they would not be expecting to have a big game, Jalen Nailor. And he stepped up big time for the Minnesota Vikings in the first half. And also Darnold, he found him too. Darnold found Nailor wide open for a big touchdown, which was actually, I'm pulling up a stat here by one of the Packers reporters for ESPN NFL Nation, Rob Domofsky. He said this, and I'll share this screen with you if you're watching on YouTube, and I'll read it. This is something that was the first completion of 30-plus air yards allowed by the Packers this season per ESPN Stats Info. Green Bay foes were 0 of 13 with 3 interceptions on such throws this season entering today. The Packers were the last team in the NFL to allow such a completion this season. And that speaks to the Packers' defensive dominance for not allowing a single bomb until week 17 of the NFL regular season is remarkable stuff. But it's also just as remarkable that the Minnesota Vikings were able to exploit one of the Packers' strengths and turn that into a touchdown in this football game. So, got to give credit to O'Connell, Darnold, Naylor, the Minnesota Vikings offensive line, Jefferson, Addison, Hawkinson. The Vikings offense was rolling. And something that needs to be addressed and talked about, because I've seen some people pointing out that Darnold is only playing the way he's playing because of the receivers that I just mentioned and because of the tight end Hawkinson, the offensive play caller, Kevin O'Connell. And my response to that would be, yeah, that's a part of it. What great quarterback does not have an elite wide receiver? Joe Montana had Jerry Rice. He's still considered one of the greatest quarterbacks ever. Steve Young had Jerry Rice. Tom Brady had Randy Moss for a few years, but had Rob Gronkowski for almost, the entire second half of his career. You look at every single great quarterback. Joe Burrow. He's having one of the best seasons a quarterback's ever had. Jamar Chase. Patrick Mahomes. He doesn't really have a guy. Travis Kelce doesn't have a wide receiver he's necessarily thrown to right now, but all the Super Bowl runs, Travis Kelce's right there, Hall of Fame tight end. So I don't want to come with these excuses for Darnold. Well, he's got Jefferson and that. What great quarterback did not have a great wide receiver to throw the ball to? Darnold's fortunate that he's get multiple guys to throw the ball to, but let's not, poo-poo Darnold because of the guys he's throwing the ball to when every single great quarterback that's ever lived has had great wide receivers to throw the football to. So let's stop with that nonsense. Late in the half, second half, I should say, Darnold throws an interception. Vikings are up. What were they up? 20-3, I think. And Darnold throws a pick in the Vikings territory, which is a bad pick. That's a bad pick. That's a case in where it's a bad pick. Is you threw a pick and they're in scoring range right away. It's one thing to throw a pick on a bomb and it's basically a punt or a pick on a third down or a fourth down, and you're throwing it up for grabs and you're trying to make a play. That's one thing. But to throw a pick in your own territory is not a bad pick. Is a bad pick, especially when you're up 20-3, and that gave the Green Bay Packers life. But what was so cool about this situation? Packers scored touchdown 20-10. This was a game-changing drive on the Minnesota Vikings. Momentum shifts to the Packers. Vikings up 20-10. And Sam Darnold, next drive, leads the Minnesota Vikings down the field for an easy touchdown to Cam Akers on a screen pass. That's a situation where a lot of quarterbacks in the league would melt and fall apart. And Darnold rose to the occasion and led the Minnesota Vikings down to a game-sealing touchdown. That ended up being the game-sealing touchdown. 27 points. They won 27-25. So that drive cannot be overlooked because the momentum had shifted and the Packers finally got something going. And it would have been easy for Darnold to go into check down mode and say, you know what? I threw a pick. Let's rely on the defense. Let's just escape out of this game alive. And he led the Minnesota Vikings down the field, went 5 for 5, and completed a touchdown pass to Cam Akers on a screen. If you don't want Sam Darnold back next season, on a franchise tag, on a contract extension, whatever it is, I don't know what you're looking at anymore, because this guy has shown the traits of a franchise quarterback. His mobility in the pocket, his arm strength, his pocket awareness, his ability to scramble when he needs to, his ability to find multiple wide receivers down the field, his toughness. He's been playing hurt for a lot of the season. His likability. Players in the locker room love him. What else could I mention about Darnold? Could go on and on. His leadership ability. Darnold has shown everything that Minnesota Vikings fans and the Minnesota Vikings organization, he has shown everything that this franchise has been looking for forever in finding a franchise quarterback. Every time we have a good run, it's the 09 Favre or a 17 Case Keenum. We had a guy fall into our lap in his prime who was looking for a destination to stay, and he found one. And now we want to risk getting rid of him for a rookie quarterback coming off a second knee surgery? A guy that's never played before? After a guy who's in his prime has now thrown for 35 touchdowns and 12 picks. It just makes no sense anymore if you think the Vikings should part ways with Sam Darnold, because he has shown everything that you would want in a franchise quarterback. Vikings defense. Late in the game, Jordan Love did what Jordan Love did last time. He padded his stats, and he ends up finishing with 185 yards, 19 for 30, 1 touchdown, 0 picks, 3 sacks, 18 yards lost, 83.5 QBR, 91.7 passer rating. In that third quarter, though, when the Vikings were dominating, Jordan Love, 10 for 18, 64 yards. The Packers offense could not do anything against the Minnesota Vikings defense for the first 3 quarters of that football game, and that's why they lost. Sure, they made a comeback. They made it look nice. It was a thrilling end of the game, but the Packers could not move the ball on the Minnesota Vikings defense the first 3 quarters. And that's that. The Vikings defense was brilliant again. Dallas Turner has another sack. They have another takeaway in the first half, first quarter, first drive of the game for the Packers, which was huge. And they pull off another high school musical celebration, which Fox cut away for some stupid reason. They should have known that was coming. Like, they've done this all season long, from celebrations like the Parent Trap they had another legendary one last week that I can't recall right now. And they have this high school musical celebration. Like, that's a big error on Fox's part. But the Minnesota Vikings defense steps up again and delivers and shuts down a Packers offense that was recently rolling. They had scored 30 points in 5 straight games coming into this ball game. And one of my concerns entering this game was that the Packers were hot and that they would continue it going into this Vikings game. And you know what? They're going to beat the Vikings at US Bank Stadium. And you know what? I was wrong. And I think what I did in this situation is I overlooked who the Packers were playing during this win streak. They played San Fran. They suck this year. They scored 38 on them. They played Miami. Tua can't play in the cold. They scored 30 there. They play Detroit. They score 31. Well, their defense stinks. They're all hurt. They play Seattle. Geno Smith gets hurt. They put up 30. They play the Saints. Okay, they stink. They put up 30. So all of these Packers wins recently have come against bottom feeders in the NFL. And I overlooked that. And I thought they would defeat the Vikings. And I'm happy to be wrong. The Minnesota Vikings defense shut down the Green Bay Packers for 75% of that football game. And really the only thing that got them going was a Sam Darnold interception in the third quarter. So the Minnesota Vikings defense, bravo to them for making plays and for doing things that nobody expected they could do before the season started. Game-changing moments. I love talking about game-changing moments because these are plays that get overlooked at the end of the day, that nobody remembers, that nobody goes back and says, oh, remember that play in the first half? So this is my game-changing moment segment that nobody remembers. The Brandon Powell muff punt. He muffs a punt. The Minnesota Vikings are dominating defensively. It could have been something that changed the game around. It would have been easy for a Packers player to jump right back on it, but Powell gets it back. It's a game-changing play. That's number one. Number two on my list is the Reichard field goal before halftime. 55-yard field goal, misses. The officials give the Minnesota Vikings the benefit of the doubt, call an offsides on one of the field goal blocking Green Bay Packers defenders. And it looked a little sketchy when they showed the instant replay. It did not look like a an offsides. It looked like a clean play by the Packers defense. And you saw Matt LaFleur getting in the official's ear. He hated the call. And that set up Reichard from 50, and he knocked that one down. That's 3 points. The Minnesota Vikings won by 2. That cannot be overlooked when you look at and just react to this football game. Because, it's a play at the end of the half. Who really cares? So many other throwing plays. That's a 3-point swing. He missed the first one. The officials bailed the Minnesota Vikings out, and they win by 2. That cannot be overlooked. Another thing you can't overlook in this game. Packers, 4th and 2, down 7-3 at this moment. Go for it. Packers receiver. It would have been a tough catch. Went off his hands, though. Jefferson or Addison would have had that one. So those are 3 game-changing plays that I mentioned in this game that you won't hear from anywhere else that completely shifted the trajectory of this football game. They're small first half plays that, no one really remembers because it wasn't a touchdown play and it wasn't a sexy catch by Jefferson or a defensive stop by Blake Cashman. But the margins of error in these football games are so slim that you take a look at these moments and you look back on them and it's like, that changed the course of this football game. It wasn't a score. Well, the field goal was. It wasn't a highlight play that you're going to see on SportsCenter or ESPN. But these plays changed the game and helped the Minnesota Vikings win this tightly contested battle late in the fourth quarter and ultimately win 27-25 thanks to an incredible catch by Cam Akers. Also, Kevin O'Connell trusts Sam Darnold with everything. 2nd and 11, putting Darnold on the run. He guns it to Jefferson, catches it. That's high-quality execution right there. That's high-quality execution. Jefferson drops that, or Darnold misfires. Clock stops, 3rd and 11. Packers have 2 timeouts. The Minnesota Vikings might lose that football game if Darnold misfires or Jefferson drops it. Coach trusts him. And the Minnesota Vikings ultimately end up winning that game. Cam Akers saves the day with a catch near his tippy toes. And he played a vital role in this game. So credit the Minnesota Vikings for going out and getting him this season and bringing him back to the purple and gold. So Minnesota Vikings win 27-25, 14-2. And next week will ultimately decide if the Minnesota Vikings will play another home game this season. Whether they're 14-3 or 15-2, this season has been a heck of a ride and a season that we will not forget for a long, long time. What a game, what a run, what a quarterback, what a head coach, what an organization. Thanks for watching, and thanks for making this podcast a part of your day.